Yeah, dear learners, today we have with us Dr. Khalid, and we are going to learn about MSD 011, Unit 3 and 4.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah.
Already Dr. Rita told about that we are going to cover in today's class MSD 011, Unit 3 and 4, and the topic is challenges and pathways to sustainable development. So I'd like to start with a very famous quote by Kofi Annan, who was the former Secretary General of the United Nations. So I quote him: "Our biggest challenge in this new century is to take an idea that seems abstract, sustainable development, and turn it into a reality for all the world's people." So today's talk about challenges to sustainable development very aptly fits this quotation. And Kofi Annan is a Ghanaian. Just to tell anyone who's interested, he is about his background. He is a Ghanaian diplomat who was elected as United Nations Secretary General. He was also co-recipient of Nobel Peace Prize in 2001. He uh, was elected for the second term again in 2001, and he was succeeded by Ban Ki-moon in 2007. So in today's counseling session, I will be talking about some of the issues related to human population growth rate, inequities and social disruption. We'll also talk about gender dimension in environmental issues, climate change, and then we'll also talk about some of the pathways for sustainable development, followed by readings and references. And of course, we can have question and answer session at the end. So let's start with today's topic and talk about some of the challenges to sustainable development. So way back in 1798, Thomas Malthus, he was an economist, a very famous economist. He wrote an essay on the principle of population, and he said that he assessed the population of the world, and he said that we are already having too large a population to be supported by limited resources of the planet Earth. So he was talking that the resources are limited, but the population is growing at a rapid rate, and we will not be able to support our future population. So mathematically, he talked about that the population is growing geometrically, and our resource base is increasing arithmetically. So we'll get short of it. In 1978, then James Watt invented steam engine, and that too led to a series of technical innovation and industrial revolution. And it was a belief that time that natural resources are infinite, limitless, and technology-driven market economy will lead to everlasting prosperity that will result in accumulation of wealth. However, this thought was highly criticized. Though accumulation of wealth increased, but the wealth increased only to the Western world or the developed countries of today, and there was a lot of disparity in income levels of developing countries, the poor countries, as compared to the developed world. So this notion was thrown down by several of the economists and researchers. And taking into account these 2 points about the increasing population and about the industrial revolution and technical innovation, it is also crucial for a country like India that we have not so far taken a very strong measure to enforce family planning, though some policies existed in some form, but still we do not have a very strong measure to force family planning for limiting the population growth rate in India. And it is very crucial for our future because we are also the second most populous country, and some of the estimates say that we will exceed China sooner. So if you look at population in chart 1, in table 1, sorry, it is showing years from 1951 to 2011. So you can see that there has been a rise in population. As of today, India is having around 1.4 billion people. The annual growth rate, if you look at from 1961, it has started to rise. Then again, it is on a decreasing trend. There is a rapid rise in urban population. You can see continuously the figures are increasing. And we all aware that several of the big mega cities in India, like Bangalore, Calcutta, and Bombay, they're all facing this heat. There is a very large population that can be accommodated within these cities. They are fighting for resources. For example, Bangalore city, if you look at its history, it was designed for a population. If you compare to that population as of today, it will be 10 times more population residing in Bangalore. And there is a scarcity of space, road construction, the scarcity of problem. One of the estimates said by 2040, Bangalore will be struggling for water. Something of similar type is also happening in Maharashtra, in Bombay, in Calcutta. Some of these trends are also being seen in the hilly states like uh, Himachal Pradesh, the capital city of Himachal Pradesh. There is shortage of water. So the population has become a problem. But many of the people and economists, they said that they had a different and weak assumptions. They said that technology will find solutions to overcome these problems, and they cited examples of green revolution. However, this was not true. Then a green revolution did provided country like India with grain, high yielding varieties of grain. So there was a time when we did not have enough food. Now we had ample grains available, but then there was an issue of access. So they said that there's a lot of food grain available, and we population will not be a problem. But then there was another problem that came up, that was the access issue. That we were having food security at country level, but we do not have food security at household level. So that was a flaw. Then they also assumed that production by masses will solve the problem of increasing population. But however, many economists, researchers, and studies suggest that even production by masses has limits. So it is very crucial that we have to control our population, which is resulting in a lot of inequalities, social disruption in the country. And we will not be having adequate food and nutrition to support such a large volume of population. Another aspect that is very crucial to this is climate change. We are aiming to reduce our temperatures, global mean temperatures, to below 2 degrees centigrade. But some of the researchers say that such a target may further stress already weak resource base for future food security. So it's likely a tipping point which is going to happen. And I was talking about the annual growth rates. If you look at the figure table 2011, it shows 1.64%. So it is estimated that we have to target a growth rate of 1% or even less, and it will not be a easy task. Now talking about another aspect, that is gender dimension in environmental issues. So we keep hearing terms like environmental refugees, feminization of poverty. These both aspects present a major threat to sustainable development. Environmental refugees, when I say, I mean about people whose native or traditional habitat has been destroyed because of a sudden change in environmental conditions. Some disruption happened, whether that was natural, say it was because of cyclone, or it was man-made, say a lot of construction is happening in hilly regions and fragile ecosystems. Because of that change has happened, and that has disrupted their normal lives, and they have to migrate and move, and this has impact on their incomes, this has impact on their lives. This is what I mean by environmental refugees. And also feminization of poverty. There is an increasing inequality in living a quality of life of men and women because of the gender gap. This is what I mean by feminization of poverty. And there is a disparity if you look at everywhere. If you look at some of the indicators of development like literacy, education, GDP per capita, ownership of land, ownership or land rights, you will find there is a large disparity between men and women in all of these areas. Even in India, women do not have the ownership right to land for land, which is debated topic. And if you look at the lives of rural women, so land, forest, or biodiversity and water, these are very closely integrated with rural women's lives. And if you look at history, look at background for last several decades, one thing will be common that women has a very positive role in environmental conservation efforts, but still gender inequality continues. For example, we have heard of the very famous Chipko movement in India, which started in 1970s, around 1970s in state of Uttarakhand, by a very famous person which we familiar with, Sundarlal Bahuguna. So that was an effort to save the environment, save the forest, and that in which the women, what they used to do, they used to put their arms around the tree trunk and thereby prevented the men with saw and axe from felling the trees. So this movement was very well supported, and large of the population was rural women who were involved in that. And another example I have taken from Himachal Pradesh in a very hilly terrain and cold area of Lahaul and Spiti. Women folk have conserved the endangered Himalayan ibex, and that through their traditional techniques. So there are a lot of examples. I've just put up two of them. So where you can see that women have played a very positive role in environmental conservation efforts. So if you're looking at sustainable development and looking at gender dimension in environmental issues, denial of equal rights and opportunities is also a sort of denial of chance for linking development and conservation, which will be critical for sustainable development. Another aspect which in the last 2 decades, I will say, has become very critical is climate change. And that will impact sustainable development in many ways. It is well agreed. Research shows that even incidents, if you're visiting different areas of the country, you can clearly see that these changes are happening and is impacting lives. So some of the recent figures given by UN is that from since 1880 to 2012, global temperature has increased by 0.85 degrees centigrade, and that has an impact. For example, there is a reduction of yields of crop like wheat, rice, maize, and other several varieties in different regions of the world, in India as well. One of the estimates said that the yield of wheat has decreased by around 40 tons a year. There has also been observed that because of this global increase in temperature, there is a rise in communicable diseases like malaria in several parts of the world, also in Asia, in Bangladesh region. Oceans have warmed and amounts of snow and ice have diminished and sea level has risen. For example, Arctic region has seen a loss of 1.7 million kilometers square every decade since 1979, and it is losing fastly. We are losing the Arctic ice law. Then, if you look at sea level rise, there are estimates which predict that 24 to 30 centimeter of rise will be observed by 2065, 40 to 63 centimeters by the end of the century, and many says that cities like regions like Bangladesh and city like London and several coastal areas of India will be submerged even by 2060. The global emissions of carbon dioxide has also increased by almost 50% since 1990. This has impact on the climate. This is impacting health, and there are several deaths reported because of climate impacts and increase in CO2 conditions. And Roxton, who is a very famous environmentalist and economist at Stockholm Resilience Institute in Sweden, he also currently chairs, he's also the co-director of the Potsdam Institute of Climate Change in Germany. He gave a very famous concept of planetary boundaries in 2009, and he says anthropogenic pressure has transgressed several Earth system process. The Earth system process, I mean, changes like there is a increase in ocean acidification rate, there is change in land use, there is loss of biodiversity reported, and several other aspects. So what is needed to change this impact is we have to look for technological institutional measures, and that should be coupled with changes in human behavior, which is very crucial. A prerequisite to limit the increase in global mean temperature to 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. Also, several nations in the world, they're committing to climate change. COP, recent COP happened in Glasgow. So, but if you look at number of countries who have committed is only 57, which represents 60% of the global emissions. There are still around 200 countries in the world, so almost 60% have still not committed. And it is estimated that this emission gap is not closed by 2030. It is extremely unlikely that 2 degrees centigrade temperature goal can still be reached. Oves Sharma, he is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UN Climate Change. He says, I quote, "We do not have time to lose, and urgent climate action is absolutely critical and necessary. What benefits the most vulnerable will benefit us all." If you talk about India, one of the estimates says that over 4.5 crore people will be forced to migrate from their homes in India by 2050 due to climate disasters such as floods, droughts, and cyclones. We all know and we're aware that the flash floods which happened in Uttarakhand and Jammu and Kashmir region, there was thousands of people who lost their lives and people who went to what I was talking about, feminization of poverty and environmental refugees. Now, we'll be talking about some of the pathways for sustainable development, which include Evergreen Revolution for sustainable survival, sustainable rural livelihoods, where I will be teaching about eco-enterprises and biodiversity-based livelihood approach. I'll also talk about knowledge empowerment of local communities and also some of the policy dimensions which are critical for sustainable development. So starting with Evergreen Revolution of sustainable survival. Before I talk about Evergreen Revolution, we need to understand Green Revolution first. So Green Revolution was a revolution in the 1960s and 70s, which aimed at increasing the yield of crops like wheat and rice, particularly high-yielding varieties I'm talking about. So India did a great work, and our agriculturists and the researchers, they developed. And there was a time when India was called a begging bowl to then it was a bread basket. And we were talking about food security at national level. So that was the Green Revolution of 1960s and 70s. And it has a history traced back to Mexico. I just forget the name of the scientist who pioneered this. And then by 1990s, it was observed that the Green Revolution has started to show signs of fatigue. And signs of fatigue, it was because of the high use of chemical fertilizers. There was issues such as salination, deterioration of soil health, depletion of agrobiodiversity, decrease in groundwater level observed in different parts of the country. So at one side, there was food security at the national level, but we were not able to provide food security at the household level. Then there was a criticism which was being said. For example, M.S. Swaminathan says, mountain of grains on one hand and million of hungry people on the other hand. It is very popular in research, being quoted time and again. So this is what Evergreen Revolution aims at. It talks about not only food security at national level, it also talks about food security at household level. And it achieves productivity in perpetuity without causing any ecological harm. We have food availability, and we also have rural livelihood to ensure food security as household level. If you look at the figure one, so if you look at the left side, the green revolution that was aiming at food security and providing at national level, it was particularly commodity centered. But if you talk about Evergreen Revolution, it is combining the food availability with rural livelihood aspects. And for this, it involves integrated natural resource management, apart from that, conservation of farming and green agriculture. So there is a side additional income and support also at the household level. So if you look at different components, why it was very successful, Evergreen Revolution, the idea and was given by Professor M.S. Swaminathan. So it talks about four components: eco-agriculture, biovillages, which involves sustainable management of natural resources, on-farm and non-farm livelihood activities. Then third component is the village knowledge centers. These village knowledge centers, they provide time and locally specific information on crops and animal husbandry, talk about technologies. They also provide information on microcredit, and they also provide market linkages. So this is another key aspect which was missing in Green Revolution was there was not appropriate medium provided for market linkages. So we know that how important these village knowledge centers are. For example, let's take an example of the coastal region of India, where there are a lot of fishermen who go out. Suppose they are poor rural families and they are going to fish. Sometimes these fishermen, when they go into oceans, they cross a long distance. They're not aware in search of their fish stock. They search. They are not aware where to find fishes. So in that search, they go long distances. Sometimes natural entities happen like cyclones, and some of them lose their lives. So what these knowledge centers or through development in technology and information on climate can help that Indian Meteorological Department that issues warnings. So something that is helping them to go to the right place at the same time that is also saving their lives and warning them about the bad climate. So some sort of this thing, the village knowledge centers, they are providing locally specific information about technology, about the crops, about animal husbandry, and they are also providing information on credit facilities, and they connect the market. The last component is ethics and equities in economic, social, and gender divides. Another aspect, another pathway approach for sustainable development for an agrarian nation like India is eco-enterprises. So some of the rationale or which support eco-enterprises are that we are aware that country like India, there are millions of resource poor and marginal farmers. Marginal farmers, I mean the average land holding size is quite small, 1.5 hectares. And they have limited means of income generation, the poor market linkages, they lack technical knowledge, and there's a large rural population who is illiterate and unskilled. So these eco-enterprises may be one of the options which may help them to undergo these issues. Eco-enterprises are eco-friendly, they help in poverty reduction, they also help in reducing drudgery, and they are pro-women. So one of the ways to develop eco-enterprises, for example, Professor Swaminathan talks about as using training method, which he calls technocracy, that is learning by doing. So a necessary capacity is being built by members of self-help groups in different rural areas, and they start the eco-enterprises. And one of the consideration which has to be taken care of starting these eco-enterprises is that it is very much influenced by the resource base of that particular region. So a particular type of eco-enterprise may be present in an area depending on its natural resource base. Not the same eco-enterprise may work in all the areas. So let's take an example. We know paddy chaff. Paddy chaff is a resource in a paddy cultivating village we get from paddy cultivation. So usually what the rural people do is they feed their cattle or burn them. So if there is an eco-enterprise, the application would be, for example, there are some of the eco-enterprises in India which are using this paddy chaff as a substrate for production of oyster mushroom. So if such a eco-enterprise is existing, so it's providing employment for the landless labor women, and this helps them to generate side income or additional income, which I was talking about something in the Evergreen Revolution, that it is also ensuring incomes and livelihoods in addition to food security. And these eco enterprises will also provide technological information and training for the people. They also provide microcredit facilities to these people. So such of these eco enterprises exist in southern part of the country, in Tamil Nadu, and there's also example of production of biofertilizers like rhizobium and azobacters, which have very superior efficacy as compared to chemical fertilizers. They are sustainable and they help in conservation of biodiversity. And such a eco enterprise has a large potential in Himalayan region, and many of them exist also in different states like Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh. Another approach would be biodiversity-based livelihood approach. So biodiversity, if I have to define, I may say, call it the variety of plant and animal life in the world, or a particular habitat, a high level of which is usually considered to be important and desirable. Similarly, there is a definition for agrobiodiversity, that variety of crops and livestock organisms, land races, and species that contribute to food and agricultural production. So if you look at the Indian scenario, there are millions of farmers who depend on traditional varieties of livelihood and food security strategies, particularly talking about rice, millet, and wheat varieties in India. So these traditional varieties are very crucial. Although there is a criticism that these traditional varieties have lower yields as compared to high yielding varieties, but still their value is immense. These, what makes them special is their genes, and these valuable genes are crucial for plant breeding, pesticide, and they have features like pesticide or drought resistance. In some of the varieties, we see a growth. They are able to grow in degradable lands. Some of the varieties use less of the fertilizers, and there are others which use less of water. So these traditional varieties are very, very critical for plant breeding purposes because of their special gene characteristics. And we should give credit to the tribal women of India who have preserved several of these varieties, traditional varieties and land races. But despite these contributions, despite biodiversity being the feedstock of biotechnology, what Swaminathan calls, those engaged in modern biotechnology make considerable money. These biotechnological firms make a lot of money using these traditional varieties. But the primary consumers, that is mostly rural or tribal women, they remain poor without income, reward, or recognition. So what he says, invaluable contribution for posterity at personal cost. So there should be reward and recognition for them who are the saviors of these traditional varieties. They should be compensated well, they should be rewarded well, and there should be this tradition should continue if you are aiming at sustainable development and livelihood based approach for a country like India. and how we are going to do that. So he talks about revitalizing the conservation traditions of rural and tribal communities. And one of the ways he talks is conservation continuum. So if you look at the box, it shows three things: in situ on-farm conservation, that is conservation by rural and tribal communities; ex situ conservation through botanical and geological gardens; and cryogenic preservation or gene banks. So these two categories, the latter ones, the in situ on-farm and ex situ, they are quite prevalent. However, in situ, the conservation of habitats, that is missing, and that is particularly the area which is contributed by the rural and tribal women, and that remains unrecognized and unrewarded. So we need to do a lot of work and on the in situ. Our policy direction should focus on preserving them, promoting them, developing them, rewarding them. Second thing, what could be done is commercialization, particularly of the neglected and underutilized species of the crop varieties I was talking about. For example, there are several underutilized millet varieties which are very rich in micronutrients, alleviate hidden hunger. Hidden hunger is because of something, a state in the body where you have lack of micronutrients and you become very lazy and you have less of energy. So such micronutrients may help to alleviate this problem. And such micronutrients and these millet varieties have that characteristics. And they are also potential dietary source for diabetics patients. So MSRF, that is MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, they have commercialized several of such varieties, millet varieties like finger millets, Italian millets, and others in Koli Hill region of Tamil Nadu. And they have trained them, these farmers and rural community. They have provided knowledge, know-how to them. They have provided market linkages support to them. And now there is a large demand for these varieties in the region. And several shops in Chennai are selling these nutrition millets varieties. And now if you go to Amazon or Flipkart, you will find several providers across the country. Similarly, Farooq, 2009, he also reports a case from Central Himalaya subsistence farming, which involves over 40 crop species, which he calls the lesser known crops, which involve cereal, basil, oilseeds. That is also supporting or the preservation aspect, the conservation traditions of rural and tribal communities. So it is crucial that this experience and traditional knowledge of cultivation and conservation be saved and preserved, because it is increasingly seen that old generation, particularly elderly men, women, they fail to pass knowledge to their younger generation because there is lack in promotion, recognition, and effort, and the younger generation of India no more wants to do agriculture. Another area which can serve as a pathway is knowledge empowerment of local communities. We agree that traditional knowledge, particularly if I'm talking about agriculture, so far I'm discussing India, so it is crucial, the traditional knowledge and wisdom. But at the same time, the way technology is changing, there is globalization. So latest knowledge in areas of global trade, natural resource management, climate change, healthcare is crucial for resource poor, small and marginal farmers, such as those in India. And this knowledge or information has to be location specific. As I was talking, that different region will demand different solutions. So the information and knowledge being provided is also be very specific. It should be demand driven, whether there is a demand for that thing in the region or not. And it should follow the bottom up approach, take care about the equity aspect. So Developments and in the areas and ICT, information and communication technology, is one of the crucial ways which can support this. This is this can also be supported by satellite-based systems, and such projects have done by Amazon Research Foundation, where they have used trained few modern ICT-based village knowledge centers in Puducherry in 1997. That was a trial project they did, and after that, there was a rise in demand for such village knowledge centers in several states, including those of Tamil Nadu. Based on the success of this program, Government of India also launched Gyan Abhiyan in 2007, which aims to provide the ICT access to all the 6 lakh villages in India. So he said, Professor Sonia, the rural communities are greatly benefiting from locale specific demand driven information on crops and animal husbandry, market prices for local agricultural produce, welfare schemes for women developed by state and central government, and healthcare. Another key dimension is the policy dimension if you're looking at the pathway to sustainable development. So, again, presenting case for the Indian agriculture I've been talking about, we all know that Indian agriculture, which comprises of majorly small and marginal farmers, they're facing a lot of strain from globalization aspect. And this the issues are several. Here I have given example of two aspects which needs policy intervention. For example, there is a threat to small farmers from cheap imports from the US and European market. So these countries, they are providing high subsidies to their farmers, which results in uncertainty and fluctuation in prices and is impacting livelihoods of Indian farmers. So Professor Swaminathan calls this as free but not fair trade. Then there is issue of mass production. We know that globally across the world, there's development, innovation in technology. Things are going, robots are being used, and the workplaces of future will become or involve less people. So the system and production processes, they are becoming efficient. But the problem which is happening is that the income and profit is being shared by few people. High inequity is existing, and several researchers, economic reports every year present that how many new billionaires have increased in the world, and they constitute how much of money of wealth as compared to the lower half, say the poor people of India. And this trend is seen everywhere in the world. Even in India, last year, the number increase in billionaires or the people who constitute around 1% of the population own almost two-thirds of the wealth of the country. So this mass production, which is now going to become efficient and more of automatic and robotic, that is resulting in jobless economic growth. To understand this, let's consider two countries, India and USA, and the milk production. So to tell you all, India is one of the largest producers of milk in the world. So for 100 million tons of production of milk, in India, we are able to provide livelihood to 90 million people. If we compare this figure with United States of America, 85 million tons of milk, that gives livelihood to only 150,000 farmers. If you look at the figures, 150,000 compared to 90 millions, which is, I will not say negligible, but very small figure. And the reason is that country like India, which is highly agrarian. More than 50% population is involved in agriculture in one way or the other associated with agriculture. But country like USA is highly developed, and they are more into manufacturing and other aspects. So if, for example, we assume that this is lost 150,000 farmers, but they can be supported. The government supported other ways in these industrial developed countries. But in India, which is agriculture is the mainstay, if people like, because of the mass production, efficient and development in technology, if such a large volume of people lose livelihood, that will be very pathetic, and that will, I will say, undermine the whole idea of sustainable development. As a result of these two aspects, with huge subsidies to farmers and also to cows in terms of feed, United States of America can end up cheap milk in India. This is just a hypothetical idea in India and destroy the livelihood of Indian milk farmers. So there can be several ways that policy needs to look at. In particular case, they have to ensure that the farmers do not lose their job. They have livelihood security. Also, when they are producing in the market, they get the right price. We see in elections all the time. We recently saw what happened in the Western UP and in Punjab. Farmers were sitting on dharnas asking for the right price. Several of them lost their lives. This high uncertainty, their livelihoods are impacted. So a policy which is talking about agriculture should take into account several of the aspects, including these two aspects as well. So the National Commission on Farmers, under the chairmanship of Professor M.S. Swaminathan, they submitted a draft national policy of farmers. So I talked about some of the issues that were not the all issues. So a sound policy, what should it look like? So their draft policy, it talked about improving economic viability of farmers by increasing their net income. It talked about developing support services, which provided provision of seeds, irrigation, power machinery, a credit at affordable prices. It talked about providing appropriate price and trade policy mechanism to enhance their income. It talked about suitable risk management measures. It talked about making India a global outsourcing hub. It talked about introducing a social security system for farmers and talked about sustainable rural livelihoods. It also talked about that the unfinished agenda in land reform should be undone, and there should be initiative to comprehensive asset and equity reform should be taken up. So the policy here, we are talking about agriculture in particular and a policy for farmers. So the policy has to be very comprehensive. It should take account all the aspects. It should ensure equity, it should ensure about their livelihoods, it should ensure market linkages, it should ensure training, technology, that everything is taken care, that there is suitable risk management measures taken care of, there is a social security being provided. So that, if such a policy is there, then that can be a sound pathway for sustainable development. So I think that's all from my side in today's counseling session. These are some of the references which I have used for the lecture. And I have also suggested some of the readings which might interest you. And if you want to see some aspects in detail, they will be a valuable resource. Uh, Thank you. Now I'm open to questions and answers. Yes, Dr. Rita, we can have questions.